The Dallas Cowboys could make an out of left field pick at number 12. We'll give you some candidates next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. He is Landon McCool. And on today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including, could we see more offensive players being drafted inside the top 11 than we are currently projecting right now? Could we see the Cowboys doubling up in round one on one specific position? But let's start for this show with a question from our guy, Foots the King, who wants to know, what is the most wild, out of left field pick the Cowboys could make at number 12 that you think is somewhat realistic?
All right, so you and I have had some fun before the show kind of looking through and debating different names. And it's kind of tough to because part of me just wants to say any offensive player, I mean, I just feel like at this point, like you really, any one of them would probably be shocking and feel like out of left field. But I think we should kind of keep it inside the sphere of realistic, right? I think if someone like Sadiq from Kenyon Sadiq from Oregon, I just think that you've got a situation where you haven't had the production out of the tight end position that you had hoped for at certain points. It started out good again last year and then kind of petered off as unfortunately Ferguson got injured. You've got some guys down the roster that are good blockers that you like, Brevin Spann-Ford, but I just don't know that he's ever going to be a passing game weapon. And adding a guy like Sadiq to this offense could really, really be fun and could really supercharge it in a way that, maybe we're underrating. So I think that he could be a guy that potentially could be a pick at 12. We're certainly not expecting that. But we have talked about them taking a tight end in this class. Maybe they plan on taking a tight end much earlier than any of us think.
And we should mention, it's not like the Cowboys haven't done this before. Literally last year at this time, nobody was mocking Tyler Booker to the Cowboys at 12. I think he was like 35th, 36th on the consensus board. We were seeing basically every single mock had them drafting Tedero McMillan at 12. And if it wasn't McMillan, it was Matthew Golden, right? And it wasn't until Peter Schrager, who puts out, I think, 2 mock drafts a year, matched Booker with the Cowboys, that you started to see a little bit of this momentum, and it kind of carried through the last 2 weeks. And that's ultimately the pick the Cowboys made at 12. So I have a tendency to dismiss everything that we hear at this time of year because there's so much chum being thrown into the water. But I think Booker's a good example last year, how you can see a name coming out of absolutely nowhere being mocked inside the top 12, and we have to at least respect it a little bit. And the name that's been kind of circulating a lot over the last 48 hours is Akheem Mesador, the Miami defensive lineman. And a lot of it comes from Brian Broaddus on a couple of different podcasts mentioning that if the Cowboys get wiped out at 12, he could be kind of the fallback option. I know there's people that don't think that's an out of left field pick because he was productive, but for me, that's a guy that even at 20 feels a tad rich. At 12 feels far too rich.
Yeah, I mean, I think it qualifies. I mean, in this situation, it's not that he's not a first round pick necessarily, although I think you would debate that a little bit, and you certainly have your points.
I think he should go like in the 20s at the earliest. So I think he is probably a first round pick. I just think 12, it's too high.
I agree. And I think high enough that it would be qualifying for this question, right? Out of left field for sure. Because I do think, look, I mean, there are certainly a lot to like about Mesador's tape. You watch his tape, you don't know how old he is. You don't know his injury history. All you're doing is watching the tape. I think you could understand why you would potentially consider him at 12. But I think that you can't ignore how old he is. You can't ignore that injury history. You can't ignore the snaps that he has on his body. So I think that there is important context in these situations, and that's how you would determine value. And I think that is why him being picked at 12 would be shocking a little bit, or out of left field to kind of go to the question. But as we've said, there's so many of these pass rushers, and a lot of it is going to be about what you're looking for. maybe we're all just misaligned on what the Cowboys are specifically looking for from a pass rusher. Maybe they view him as a guy that is ready to go because of his age or because of his advanced hand technique. Maybe that's why they could potentially value him at 12.
Well, let's run through some other names because I don't want to think about Mesador anymore. It makes me sick.
That's fair. Okay.
CJ Allen. Now that's a name that we have seen mentioned to the Cowboys in round 1. There've been a couple mocks where he's gone at 12. I still think that would feel very wild considering kind of how the way that last year went, the way that the athletic testing went. I wouldn't be a fan of that one, but I can't completely discount it either.
I think it's a similar situation, right? Where it's not that you don't necessarily view him as a good player or even a first round player potentially. It's just at 12, it seems extremely rich for that specific player. And I think you covered it. Like his is not an age issue or an injury issue necessarily. It's more of an athletic testing issue. It's an upside issue. Is he limited in what he can do? I think what he does extremely well, and that's why we're even considering him as a first round pick. But I think if I'm taking a linebacker at 12, I really want an extreme difference maker who doesn't have any glaring weaknesses,
yes.
Who is going to be worthy of that kind of pick. I just feel like CJ Allen's a really good player, but taking him at 12 would be a little bit out of left field. And I know that Foots actually is a big fan of CJ Allen, so maybe he would be upset while we're answering his question that we're suggesting it, but I just think it's a little bit of a reach for him.
All right, I want to run through some other players. Can you just kind of give me your thoughts if you hear Commissioner Roger Goodell mentioning this name of the Cowboys? How about Emmanuel McNeil-Warren?
I would feel less worried about it than those other two guys that we just mentioned because I like the player, I think, a little bit better than those guys. Mesador probably about the same, but yeah, I would be shocked because I do think it's a little bit earlier than I thought.
Peter Woods, the defensive tackle from Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think probably along the lines of where CJ Allen, where it's just like I just don't think his talent warrants being taken at 12, and I think there's probably a bunch of other guys I'd rather have.
I mean, I could talk myself into it. I just didn't love the tape, and I don't love the athleticism, so that's where it gets a little wonky for me. Couple other guys. Caden Proctor. Now, this is a left tackle at Alabama, but what if the idea is that like Tyler Booker campaigned hard for him and he believes he can get the most out of him here in Dallas?
I mean, I don't love it at 12, and I especially don't love it considering what they did with Steele's contract from what I remember this offseason. So, but I mean, again, like, if you're gonna make a mistake and draft an offensive lineman, like I guess I'd rather that than another player who absolutely I don't feel like could get on the field. I just feel like it's a misallocation of resources.
I'm giving you a lot of different names. What about somebody like Colton Hood, a cornerback that we think the Cowboys might like a little bit, rather than waiting for him to maybe fall to 20? What if you just took him at 12?
I think with Hood I would be interested. Here's why, because I don't agree necessarily, but I think Hood is at least a guy where I would like to hear the thought process for the Cowboys on that one. I would at least hear them out on the explanation, I think. And if Mansoor Delane wasn't there, I don't know that he's, tiers better or worse than any of the remaining cornerbacks out there potentially.
Yeah. I think 20 is a little bit rich for him, but also if they've drafted him, I'd be like, okay, it's not my favorite pick, but let's see how it plays out. 12 just feels too high. Like I think
it does.
It just feels too high. A couple other ones, just really, really quickly. Kayden McDonald, the defensive tackle from Ohio State.
I love McDonald, man. And at 12,
what if the idea is like, hey, we think he's the best player of that Ohio State defense?
I mean, look, I think that they'd have a solid argument. I think that more of an argument than people realize. I think, but I guess a defensive lineman at 12 is more traditional. Maybe not a nose tackle like this, but he is so good that I wouldn't love it, but I also wouldn't be upset with having him.
That's the way I would be like, you know what, that's higher than he should have been drafted. But I also just love the player. I would not draft him at 12, but I also would be like, it's going to be really fun to have him on this defensive line. I'm going to give you one more before we move on. What about my guy, Cassius Howell?
At 12?
Yeah, look, by your reaction, I can tell you don't like it.
It's high for Cassius Hal, but again, honestly, I think I probably to a lesser degree. Well, maybe not too much lesser. I think it'd be very similar to the Kayden McDonald situation, where I think we got a really good player. Maybe we overpaid for where we should.
I agree. All right, let's talk about what positions the Cowboys could potentially double up on in round one. We'll get to that next. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Financial stress is something that a lot of people are carrying right now, and it's not just about numbers. It can affect your sleep, your relationships, and your overall mental health in ways that build up over time. And the reality is, struggling with money doesn't mean that you failed. Sometimes it means that you just haven't had the right kind of support. It's something that I think about almost every single day, how easy it is to put pressure on yourself financially without really talking about it. You know, that stress that comes from trying to figure everything out on your own, the expectations that you have to make sure that you have everything all together, and how that pressure can spill in to other areas of your life. Therapy isn't about financial advice, but it is about working through the stress, the anxiety, and the emotions that come with it. And with over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 6 million people served nationwide, BetterHelp makes it easier to get matched and start focusing on what you need. When life feels overwhelming, therapy can help. Sign up and get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That is BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Don't forget to check out the Everydayer Club for ad-free episodes and access to a group chat with Landon and I and other listeners of the show. Tap the link in the show notes or go to lockedoncowboys.supercast.com. All right, next question comes from Jeff. He wants to know, what is the one position that you could see the Cowboys doubling up on in the 2026 NFL draft? Now, we can do this if you want to talk about first round, but let's expand it to the first 2 days of the draft, because I have a hard time seeing the Cowboys doubling up on one position. But he did mention, what about the idea of Caleb Downs at 12 and then Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, the safety from Toledo, at 20?
I honestly think that, especially on the defensive side of the ball, outside of linebacker, I could see them doubling up at any one of those positions, right? Just because I think, if you want to say defensive back instead of safety, absolutely, right? Because I think Caleb Downs, if you draft him, especially up there, your plan is to play him at the nickel and to play him a lot at the nickel, right? And then I think probably play some safety if you go into a more base look. But I honestly think most of his snaps would be kind of in the nickel situation. Mm-hmm. I do think that you have spent some resources at specifically safety this year. So
that's what makes it hard. Is like, if let's say Downs falls to 12, and even use Thieneman. Let's say they like Thieneman more. I don't know how you get Downs, Thieneman, Malik Hooker, and Jalen Thompson all on the field at one time. That just seems like a lot of resources spent at one position.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be hard. I mean, it would be a look towards the future for sure. And it's a lot harder to get that many safeties, I think, like a 4 safety situation, than it is to get all those corners on the field. So if you wanted to double up at corner somehow, if you got Mansoor Delane, and then you felt you really like you love Colton Hood or something like that. I mean, that's probably not a great necessarily pairing, but just something like that. I think that would make, or like a third round corner, like you expanded the top 100. Like if you got Mansoor Delane and then got Malik Muhammad or something like that in the third round. Yeah. Like I could certainly see like that, but I mean, but especially at positions like, edge. I mean, I would not be shocked at all if they decided to go get 2 guys in this draft, and maybe not 1 or 2, but like we talked about situations where they trade up and maybe they keep their 20th pick and they get a guy like Bailey. What if they get to 20 and the best player on their board is Cassius Howell or someone like that, and they just want to continue to add to pass rushers. I mean, look what happened with Seattle this year. I mean, they certainly didn't have too many pass rushers. So I could easily see a strategy that involves, hey, maybe it's not necessarily just about getting okay at all three levels. Maybe we need to find one level that we really kind of supercharge and then try to build around that with the kind of middle class of our defense.
I think it's going to be hard to do it. Now, in your situation, I was thinking about like David Bailey and Romello Height that you grab at like 92 and you pair the two Texas Tech. Yeah, like that would, I could see that, but like I can't see them drafting two linebackers with the first, two of their first three picks, unless you're calling like Cassius Howell a linebacker and Jacob Rodriguez as a linebacker, or Sonny Styles. I mean, I guess technically, but those are two totally different positions for me. It seems hard considering the lack of resources they had. If they had another pick at like round 2, I could see it, but I just don't see that happening.
You talking about off-ball linebacker?
Well, even honestly, just in general, like they've got so many needs, and I wonder if it's just not going to stack up where they can take two guys at the same position with two of their first three picks.
I think it's safety. I think at linebacker, you're just out. I think it's
linebacker's
safety.
Out.
Yeah. I think it's safety. It's hard to kind of justify, especially since that is one of the positions that you had actually spent at free agency this offseason.
And they even spent $5 million on PJ Locke to be kind of a third, fourth safety for him.
Absolutely. So it's not like the safeties position is the one spot where they actually probably don't have like a floor need, right? But at a position like edge rusher, where you can't have enough good edge rushers, like. And again, like if you're gonna make a mistake or if things go bad for you in the first round, defaulting to pass rushers and offensive line is not a terrible way to spend your resources. So if they got caught in a situation, I'd rather see them get another talented pass rusher than reach on a player that's 2 tiers below him because we already have a pass rusher we drafted in the first round.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think about what the best combo would be. I mean, if you wanted to do the Miami combo with Ruben Bain and Mesador, that would be at least kind of fun if Bain fell to 12.
Well, if somehow you manage to get up to 3 and get Arvell Reese, right? You got yourself a linebacker and a pass rusher, right? But you could still easily see yourself getting to 20 if you somehow manage to keep 20 to get up to 3 and go, oh, well, look, we still got another really good pass rusher we like. Can't have enough of these guys and then pluck him off the board. I think that makes sense.
Could you see them going like Arvell Reese and Keldrick Falk, like at 20? It's like, okay, we've got our guy that can blitz and everything. We need another guy that can come stop the run. We got the guy that's going to give us juice. Let's get the big body guy that we can move all across the defensive line.
Yeah, 100%. Like, I mean, again, like I think
it just feels cheating a little bit. I'm trying to get guys at the exact same position, but it's hard.
Look, again, I think pass rusher is the one position where it's easier. But I think it's safety and linebacker, it's hard. Like it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Corner, you always just need a ton of talented guys. So having those makes a little more sense. But even then, you spend some money there. So the answer is yes. It could happen.
Be tough to do though.
But I wouldn't say it's what they're targeting necessarily.
All right, let's talk about, could we see more offensive players going inside the top 11 picks than even are being projected right now? We'll get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. This question comes from Mark. I'm going to read it here. It says, are we underestimating how much teams inside the top 11 need offensive weapons, or is the talent disparity between offense and defensive players truly that great this year?
I tend to think that it's actually that the talent is just all plateaued, and so teams that have offensive needs are going to take offensive players, and teams that have defensive needs are going to take defensive players. And I think that the other thing that's really happening, this is something you and I were talking about before the show too, and I've been talking about this whole offseason. There are groups and teams, or whatever, the draft media network, that are artificially pushing up these kind of money 5 players just to kind of help make sense of
Mm-hmm.
these mock drafts and make sense of the needs of the teams up there. And so I think it's hard to tell, because I actually think there's a good chance that there's going to be a little bit of moving around at the top this year. So I think kind of estimating where people are moving around for is difficult. I think it's probably a safe bet to guess that they're trading for valuable pieces, including the money 5 positions: tackle, wide receiver, quarterback, cornerback, defensive end, but or pass rusher, however you want to classify that. But I also think that because of the fact that the kind of more blue chip players in this class don't really exist at those positions, it's a free for all. So I think people are just trying to kind of grasp at straws. And right now you're seeing mock drafts basically being run by people guesstimating what those teams' needs are. But I think once we get to draft night, I think teams are going to do a good job of shuffling where they are on the board to get where they need to be to get the players at the positions they want at the value that they think is appropriate.
I also think we're not seeing teams reach for quarterbacks as much as we have in previous years. Like, I think in 5 years ago, there's just no doubt that Ty Simpson's a top 5 pick, right? Like
top 10. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think that's going to happen. I think teams are being more picky about it now. And even receivers, I think we have seen years where, like, JSN was the first receiver to come off the board, I believe, in the 2023 draft. So teams are willing to be patient there. But offensive line is a spot where there's just, you can't be patient, because every team needs them, and there's just not enough of them to go around. And I'm even looking at like a draft like last year. You had guys like Kelvin Banks and Tyler Booker, who we talked about earlier. Tyler Booker was in the 30s on the consensus board. Banks was being drafted or being mocked like in the late teens. Booker goes 12. Kelvin Banks goes 9. And then we don't have another offensive tackle go until Josh Connerly at pick 29. And that was a reach. Like, I don't think a lot of people had Connerly going that early. So I think these offensive tackles like Sfano and Francis Mauigoa and Monroe Freeling, like, they all have warts, but they're going to get a lot prettier the closer that we get to the draft, because these teams are going to need them.
Well, here's the thing. Everyone's always preaching because everyone else is telling them to, right? Everyone is always preaching, don't draft for need, don't draft for need. The truth of the matter is, you can draft for need all you want. You just have to find a way to get the appropriate value for the need that you're drafting for, right? Yeah. Like, if you're a top 10 pick, a top 10 team, you can do what you're suggesting, right? You can just reach for an offensive lineman if you want, and just justify it by saying, oh, if he fails, he'll fail to guard, so he's got high upside, right? Like, we see that kind of thing all the time. Or you can do something appropriate, like trade back to where you feel like the offensive tackle is probably supposed to be, and then take him there and still get the equivalent value you're looking for from that pick by getting what you get back from the trade. So I think that there are lots of ways that teams are going to solve this. Teams are going to go get what they want to get, and they're going to target certain things. But the key, again, is to manipulate the situation so that you're getting the appropriate value for the pick that you were assigned, and that you can use that value to get the players that you want plus more.
I just want to kind of hammer home this point one more time. We saw, like, in the 2023 draft, Darnell Wright, who actually the Bears had the number 1 pick in 2023. They traded back with Carolina, and then they traded back again. They took Darnell Wright. Darnell Wright is somebody that the Cowboys had in on a 30 visit, and they liked him quite a bit. They thought he was a guy that could maybe fall to them, in the later stages of round 1. He goes 10. This happens every year because teams so desperately need offensive linemen. So I won't be surprised if we have 3 go inside the top 11 picks. And if you're a Cowboy fan, and obviously you are because you're listening to this podcast, what you really want is at least 5 offensive players to go inside the top 11. One's going to be Mendoza. One's going to be Jeremiah Love. If you can get 2 receivers and 2 offensive linemen, that almost guarantees you that you're going to get somebody like Mansoor Delane or Caleb Downs or Sonny Styles falling to you at 12.
Yeah, and it's a thin razor. It's a razor margin, right? It's so the question becomes, like, that's why the Cowboys would look at trade up situations, right? Is can they rely on the fact that teams? I think the tackle proposition is probably easy to clear. There may be 3 tackles potentially that go before the Cowboys at 12. I wouldn't be shocked. I think wide receiver is a little bit different proposition, and I think 1 for sure, I would say. But is that second wide receiver going to get taken? I think it's going to be really close, and I think that's why we're seeing a lot of really great jump up and down, exciting drafts at 12, and ones that are disappointing, and we're having to settle for guys that we don't think are appropriate at 12.
Anytime I do the mocks, like I can almost tell you if the Cowboys are going to get a good player on 12 on defense if you tell me what happens at 3. If Arizona takes David Bailey or Arvell Reese, it's going to be a real struggle for those defensive guys to fall down to 12. But if they go with Francis Mauigoa, and then you have the Browns take Spencer Fano or Monroe Freeling, it almost guarantees that one of those guys is going to fall. So I think we're going to be stressing about this draft right up to 3. So every mock draft that you see that has the Cardinals taking an offensive lineman at 3 is going to be a major win for Dallas.
But remember, there's also still that back door, because there's going to be teams that are going to be looking to get back to appropriate spots. So if you have an opportunity and you get a value, don't be afraid to trade up to go get your guy, because I think it's going to be a year in which you're going to be able to do so with a little bit of a discount.
All right, that is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. If you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Cowboys ad-free, plus members-only Discord access, and so much more. Head over to LockedOnCowboys.com, LockedOnCowboys.supercast.com to join the club. Should I get it right? For those of you on video, we can send you the first ever 24/7 national NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make your second listen the Locked On NFL Draft Podcast. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus _Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.